Hi, my name is Peter Andras. I am a professor at Edinburgh Napier University. This is my lecture series on the evolution of complex systems. We start with lecture 1, the introduction. This is part 1 of lecture 1. So, in these lectures, I will be talking about how complex systems evolve and how we can understand and analyze this evolution of such systems. Now, to start with, we will look at a few example systems. In the first part of the introduction, we will look at biological evolution. Now, the fundamental question that we are aiming to understand is how evolution happens. So let's have a look at various stages of biological evolution. Let's consider bacteria. What you see on the screen is an image of some bacteria. Now, these organisms are very simple. They typically have just one cell with a relatively simple genome, which encodes mainly proteins. Now, these organisms can swim around. They sometimes have a quite hard protective shell, and they can adapt to their environment and can reproduce and expand very quickly. There are billions of bacteria on our skin and inside of our cells, and many more around us. Bacteria live really everywhere. Now, if you look at another organism, the medusa, this is a multicellular filter feeder. It has a relatively simple structure. It has a few types of tissues. Although more recently it has been analyzed and has been shown that actually these few types of tissues are in the range of a few tenths of different kinds of cells, forming different tissues in it. So clearly what you see is that this is much more complex than a bacterium. It has different kinds of cells, much more complex life than a bacterium. Now, let's make a big jump and let's consider the mouse. Now, in a way somewhat similar to the filter feeder, this animal has many kinds of tissues. Really, nobody really counted yet the full set of different kinds of cells, but we know that even simple parts of a mouse, like the retina, might have tens or hundreds of different kinds of cell types. So it is a much more complex organization than the medusa. How did we get from the very simple bacteria to medusa to mouses? Or consider the monkeys. Well, monkeys, similar to the mice, they have very complex bodies with lots of different cell types, brains, and so on, complex behavior. But what's more, their social behavior is much more complex than the mouse social behavior. There is social behavior among mice as well, clearly. They are social animals. However, monkeys are much more social. They have much more complex interactions. So how did we get so far? And then consider the humans. Yeah, again, like monkeys, very complex animals. Our brains are bigger, and we have far more complex social structure than monkeys or any other animals. So what you see is a few examples, starting from the simple single-cell organisms to the multicellular, large-brained organisms which have extremely complex social structure. So, how can you understand the evolution of these biological systems? What are the common things, first of all? They all have genes, they have cells, they have tissues, organs. They are all forming organisms. interactions between organisms. What drives this evolution? How do we develop from the single cell bacteria to the multicellular organisms and then to the organisms which interact between themselves to form complex social systems? So how can we describe this? Now, of course, there are already lots of theories about evolution, but how can we describe this kind of, if you like, a more formal, more clearly conceptualized way? Then, if we consider evolution of these systems, then what are the boundaries? What are the units of evolution? Is evolution happening at the level of the genes, the level of cells, tissues, organisms? How does it work? And clearly, if you look at viruses, for example, is that a unit? The kind of combination of few genes, or perhaps the genes themselves? Look at cancer. It looks like happening at the level of cells and tissues? So really, these are not fully resolved questions. So consider the ant colony. Is the individual ant the unit of evolution, or rather the whole colony of ants, dozens or perhaps millions of ants together? And then how can we link together the biological and the social aspects of this evolution? So clearly, if you look at humans, monkeys, bees, ants, and there are many other social animals, what you see is that there are social systems. Dogs interact with each other and they form some social system. Mouse, they interact with each other and they have some level of social system. So how did the kind of simpler social system evolve in other animals, and how that leads to the much more complex social system in humans, monkeys, and bees? Really, what are the mechanisms? And again, there are lots of theories, lots of work on this. But here we will try to provide kind of new way of addressing this. And perhaps core. So what's the role of information communication? So clearly, if you look at these systems that I mentioned, the genes, the proteins, nervous system, these are all ultimately about information processing. Somehow, the elements of these systems, be them protein cells or organism individuals, they communicate with each other. So how can we try to understand the role of communication and information in the context of their evolution? So to summarize, in this first part of the introductory lecture, I talked about a few kinds of biological organisms and highlighted a few questions about how their evolution happens, how information and communication plays a role in, and how the various kinds of biological and social behavioral complexity emerge in the context of these systems. So we will address these questions in the future lectures. Thank you.